Having completed his mission, Bai Liduan left the blood-soaked room and returned to the inn. He seemed to shed his murderous aura, reverting to the ordinary appearance of a young teenager. Guangtu's visibly nervous and trembling demeanor caught Bai Liduan off guard. The maid glanced over, saw Bai Liduan had returned, and quietly told him, "Ever since the young master left, he's been up all night, unable to sleep." Seeing his young master return safely, Guangtu let out a soft sigh of relief. He waved his hand, returning to his usual cheerful and lively self. Guangtu gestured decisively and grandly, calling out, "Please bring out your most expensive dishes." The maid happily obliged with a smile. After the lavish dishes were served, Bai Liduan and Guangtu began to enjoy the meal. However, the events of the previous night were still Guangtu's greatest concern, and he couldn't suppress his curiosity and worry. He questioned Bai Liduan about the circulating rumor that the Bloodhound had killed guild leader Yang Jizhe and fled with his assets. Bai Liduan merely smiled, took a sip of wine, and feigned surprise, asking, "Something like that happened?" Guangtu looked at Bai Liduan's calm expression and couldn't help but ask suspiciously, "You didn't do it, did you, young master?" But Bai Liduan calmly continued to enjoy his wine and retorted, "Didn't you say the Bloodhound was responsible?" Though it was hard to believe, he forced a strained smile, trying to deceive himself. "That's right. How could the young master be capable of that? It must be a coincidence. The events surely occurred before the young master arrived there." Bai Liduan found the reasoning plausible, which only made Guangtu more suspicious such a perfect coincidence couldn't exist. Unable to delude himself further, Guangtu asked his young master directly, "What exactly did you do?" Bai Liduan, still cold and composed, stated matter-of-factly as if it were trivial, "I told you, I would kill them." The stark truth made Guangtu's eyes widen, and he covered his mouth in sheer terror. He didn't dare raise his voice, only whispering to ask again, "Did the young master steal the assets?" Bai Liduan, still sipping his wine calmly, corrected Guangtu. "It wasn't stealing. It was compensation." Hearing the word compensation left Guangtu even more astonished. Bai Liduan's gaze turned icy, filled with deep resentment. "They ordered the death of my parents, my entire clan, and attempted to seize everything. So, considering that, calling it compensation doesn't seem unwarranted. But curiosity is a killer." Guangtu fearfully asked for the amount, only to immediately regret asking. This prompted Bai Liduan to tease him. "Why?" "I'll tell you." Guangtu shook his head frantically, desperately refusing, afraid that knowing too much would make him an easy target for elimination. Bai Liduan smiled joyfully and complimented him. "Haha, you understand well." He recalled that the silver box Yang Jizhe had given him during the negotiation was estimated to be around 30,000 taels. If he had stayed to sell more then, he could have earned more, but it would have led to unpredictable consequences and potentially exposed his identity. Zheng Yu also knew his identity. He always believed he was a sleeping dragon, which led him to swear loyalty. Of course, he wasn't foolish enough to trust that loyalty, so the best path was to use him for his own purposes. After the truth was revealed, Guangtu was still troubled by one thing. He asked if the young master had killed Yang Jigang, and the answer was yes. But contrary to hatred, Guangtu showed sorrow and pity for the man because he was still young. Bai Liduan, with his firm stance on justice, immediately retorted, "What does age have to do with right and wrong? Whether you are young or old, if you do something that warrants death, you must die." Guangtu admitted it was true, but still felt conflicted. Bai Liduan clarified his motivation. "I am telling you this so you know. I didn't kill him for your sake, or the maid's. He tried to kill me that very day." Though it reassured him that it wasn't his fault, it didn't seem to change Guangtu's mood. Bai Liduan smiled gently at Guangtu. "You are indeed very kind-hearted, Guangtu." At this point, Bai Liduan changed the subject. He wanted to teach him martial arts. The master's seriousness made Guangtu even more panicked. Bai Liduan stated firmly, to Guangtu's astonishment, "Not the martial arts you merely imitate, but real martial arts." Guangtu still couldn't believe it and asked again, but received an extremely certain answer from his young master. But what worried him more was that he was already 25 this year, too late to learn martial arts. Yet, this didn't faze Bai Liduan, who smiled confidently and decisively. "Leave that matter to me." He was very confident that if he were the master, the age disadvantage could be compensated for. This time, he seriously asked for Guangtu's true intentions. "Think carefully, because this decision will greatly affect your life." Guangtu fell silent. After a period of intense thought, his eyes lit up with determination. "I will learn." Bai Liduan's attitude grew more serious, and he asked for the reason why. Guangtu's biggest reason for wanting to learn martial arts was the young master. Since the young master had changed, he also wanted to be changed like him. But Bai Liduan's next question confused Guangtu. Why do you treat me so kindly, even though I used to be nothing but trash? But Guangtu's answer surprised Bai Liduan somewhat. It was a very old story, a long time ago. When Guangtu was 15 and Bai Liduan was 10, he had fallen gravely ill. After waking up from a life-threatening fever, the first person he saw was the young master. Bai Liduan at that time gently and anxiously placed a cold cloth on Guangtu's forehead, and it was that genuinely worried expression that Guangtu could never forget for the rest of his life. That pure kindness was the reason Guangtu always treated Bai Liduan well. The story happened long ago, but it was an experience etched into his heart. After hearing the answer, Bai Liduan let out a slight smile. He announced the martial art's name. The martial art you will learn is the Namhei 7 techniques. Guangtu was somewhat stunned upon hearing the name of this sword art, but the young master's next words astonished him even more. Bai Liduan formally declared, "From now on, you are no longer my servant, but my subordinate." Guangtu understood this was a momentous decision that would completely change his life. He quickly stood up and performed a master acknowledgement ceremony. He cupped his hands respectfully and bowed. This was the way people in the martial arts world pay homage to a master when learning martial arts. Bai Liduan smiled with satisfaction. However, this decision by Bai Liduan did not mean accepting Guangtu as a disciple. He accepted the thank you bow as a gesture of gratitude and looked out at the sky. The brilliant dawn light marked a new beginning for both of them. After settling everything at the Yang Guild, Bai Liduan returned to his clan. There, his parents were discussing the matter of guild leader Yang Jiza. Bai Liduan's father expressed his astonishment. "Unbelievable. Guild leader Yang tried to kill us by mobilizing all those wanderers." His mother sighed in relief that Yang Jize had ruined himself by antagonizing the Bloodhound, saving the Bai family from a major disaster. But Bai Liduan's father was still determined to pay off all their family's debts. Bai Liduan understood this well. His father was a responsible man who always considered this debt as owed to the Yang Guild's clan, not to Yang Jiza. Bai Liduan sincerely spoke with an apologetic look about his past actions. "I hope father won't be too upset about it." This very statement surprised both his parents. Both of them felt relieved by this major change in their son, encouraging him to rest after his long journey. Stepping out of the main hall, Bai Liduan fell into thought. This was the first time he had said such a thing. In his previous life, Bai Liduan was a fatherless child, raised solely by his mother. But this feeling wasn't too bad. Bai Liduan returned to the large front hall of the residence and placed a large bag of money on the table. The captain of the swordsmen didn't understand the young master's action and spoke up to ask. Bai Liduan replied that this was the 3,000 taels he had saved up until now. But this action was too unusual compared to his past, making it hard for the subordinate to believe. Bai Liduan had to explain that he had saved the money to use after getting married. Bai Liduan couldn't say it was a portion of the money taken from Yang Jize, and the amount was chosen to prevent suspicion. The subordinate couldn't help but wonder why the young master was giving him this money. Bai Liduan, ignoring the question, gave an instruction. "Please use this money to reorganize the swordsman team." He asked the subordinate to increase their monthly wages and hire new people, which the clan couldn't afford before. But Captain Seo Jung asked sternly in return, "Do you think we are staying for the money, sir?" Bai Liduan knew that, but he still said what he thought. "But we cannot let their families suffer because of money." This answer was completely unexpected, and Seo Jung was utterly taken aback by the young master standing before him. Seo Jung accepted the offer but refused the money itself, saying it should be given to the clan's patriarch. But Bai Liduan guessed that the captain wouldn't accept money from his father. Seo Jung himself was a loyal man. Even if his father gave him money to reorganize the team, he would still refuse. His reason was that he was confident he could manage the swordsman team and wanted to prioritize paying off debts first. But Bai Liduan was very resolute. He said, "You and the swordsman team are the core of our clan. If you and the swordsman team fall, our clan will fall with you." Swordsman Captain Seo Jung still firmly objected and asserted, "The center of the clan is not the swordsman team, but the patriarch." Bai Liduan smiled to himself, thinking it was surprising to find such a loyal and responsible person like Seo Jung here. Bai admitted Seo Jung was right, but at the same time offered a sharp argument. Isn't the swordsman team what gives the patriarch the strength to become the center of the clan? He resolutely demanded that Seo Jung accept the money, explaining it was for the benefit of the patriarch as well. Finally, Seo Jung accepted the offer, but seriously committed. "I promise I will only use this money for the swordsman team." Bai Liduan was satisfied and replied with thanks. Due to the young master's unusual attitude, Captain Seo Jung called out to him just as he was about to leave. He was quite surprised that the captain called his intimate name. Captain Seo Jung sincerely expressed deep gratitude for this positive change in the young master. but the answer made him feel warm. He understood there was no need for many words with a person like Seo Young, because he would prove the results himself. A few days later, the reorganization of the swordsman team began. Captain Seo Jung remarked that the atmosphere in the swordsman team had improved, with resounding shouts of sword practice echoing. Not only the swordsman team but the entire Bai clan became more lively. This change stemmed from the rumors spreading that Bai Liduan had paid off the team's outstanding wages, along with the announcement for new member recruitment, and the change in Bai Liduan himself, who was once considered trash, had invigorated the entire clan. Although things were progressing well externally, Bai Liduan faced a major problem: insufficient internal energy. Even though Bai Liduan didn't sleep, dedicating all his time to cultivating the heavenly outer circulation mental art, a technique that helps accumulate internal qi 3 times faster than ordinary cultivation methods. Despite his diligence, he had only accumulated a very small amount of internal qi. Bai Liduan determined there was only one solution now. He needed to increase the speed of his internal qi accumulation by clearing his Ren and Du meridians. To do that, he needed a spirit elixir. Bai Liduan recalled he had 29,000 taels left. He wondered if this amount would be enough to buy a spirit elixir. Finally, he decided to go to the Jinan branch of the black market to look for a spirit elixir. At the black market branch in Jinan, the vendor asked Bai Liduan about the type of spirit elixir he wanted to buy. Is it a pill? Or a herb? Bai Liduan, whose face was concealed by a conical hat, simply replied, "It doesn't matter." The answer made the old vendor ponder a little. Bai Liduan knew that rare items in the black market were also rare in the martial world, and if he couldn't find it here, it would be difficult for him to buy a spirit elixir with money for a long time. The vendor smiled and said Bai Liduan's luck was quite good. Their branch hadn't had any spirit elixirs for the past 6 months, but one had just arrived 2 days ago. That spirit elixir was the heavenly 1,000-year herb. The answer stunned Bai Liduan. It was an extremely rare herb, known to be able to provide an amount of internal qi equivalent to 10 to 15 years of cultivation. He quoted the price of the heavenly 1,000-year herb as 44,000 taels. Hearing this amount, Bai Liduan suddenly felt disappointed because he was 15,000 taels short. The vendor warned him, "Considering how hard spirit elixirs are to come by these days, even if you don't buy it, it will be sold very quickly. This might be the only time you can buy it." Despite this, Bai Liduan maintained his decision to withdraw. The vendor asked Bai Liduan for the reason he wanted to buy the spirit elixir. Bai Liduan replied matter-of-factly, "To become stronger, of course." The vendor further inquired, "And if you become stronger, what then?" Bai Liduan replied with a gentle expression, saying he had recently come to his senses after a life of being unfilial and now wished to show his filial piety. The vendor burst out laughing and apologized for his reaction, saying it was the most ridiculous thing he had ever heard doing business here. Bai Liduan found the reaction puzzling. The vendor explained that among the martial artists who had tried to buy a spirit elixir, not a single one was a filial son. Bai Liduan remained silent. He understood the vendor's meaning. When a person becomes obsessed with becoming stronger, they have no choice but to neglect those around them. Just like his past life, when he became the strongest in the martial world, he suffered the agony of being unable to call his mother mother. That feeling of regret was always deeply etched in his heart. By the time he realized it, his mother was just a cold, lonely tombstone lying there. He regretfully noted that he had missed the chance to be the first filial son to buy a spirit elixir. After a moment of silence, the vendor changed his demeanor, saying he believed that every spirit elixir had a true owner. He decided to give Bai Liduan a chance. "I will wait 10 days. If you can raise enough money by then, I will sell it to you." Bai Liduan accepted the opportunity, his eyes shining with the determination to prove himself. However, time passed quickly. 3 days had passed since then, and he still hadn't figured out a way to earn more money. Bai Liduan calculated that if he tried to squeeze every last bit of money he could from the Yang Guild, he might be able to raise the missing 15,000 taels. However, he knew that doing so would send his relationship with Zheng Yu plummeting. Zheng Yu would think he was greedy, trying to hoard money, and start having other thoughts. Nevertheless, Bai Liduan still had plans for the Yang Guild. While he was worrying, Guangtu appeared and immediately noticed the young master was preoccupied. Bai Liduan smiled, thinking Guangtu was almost as sharp as his former advisor, Gal Saryang. Guangtu went straight to the point. "You want to see Miss Song again, don't you?" Ignoring Guangtu's nonsense, Bai Liduan focused on something else. He decided to embark on another mission, but this time with a completely new identity. He had spent 1,000 taels to buy a human skin mask, and disguised himself as a silver-haired, calm-looking character to ensure no one would recognize him. His target was the Khufu branch of the Murim Alliance. It was Guangtu's question that reminded him of the origin of the debt the Bai Liduan clan owed to the Yang Guild. Bai Liduan had always thought the 20,000 taels was money he borrowed to capture bounty criminals, but Guangtu revealed the truth. It was because Bai Liduan had become his hostage. Bai Liduan was helpless against the stupidity of the former owner of this body, but Guangtu added something more important. At that time, if not for the intervention of great warrior Gong, the Khufu branch leader of the Murim Alliance, whom I often associated with, I would have died. Bai Liduan was extremely surprised. He couldn't believe that someone of the status of a Murim Alliance branch leader would associate with a fool like his former self. Guangtu added, I know the patriarch gave 15,000 taels to Guo Dushu and 5,000 taels to great warrior Gong to show gratitude. Bai Liduan realized that these expenditures were the final blow to their clan's finances. Shocked that a Murim Alliance leader would accept a bribe, Bai Liduan now had a target to deal with and make money. Bai Liduan was determined to retrieve that money. He told himself he would recover the money by stealing it from the Khufu branch of the Murim Alliance. In his new identity with silver hair and expensive attire, Bai Liduan went to the Khufu branch of the Murim Alliance to meet the branch leader. When a guard asked where he was from, Bai Liduan replied decisively, the Heavenly Outer Sword Sect. Hearing this name, the guard immediately showed surprise and hastily apologized, telling Bai Liduan to wait a moment. Bai Liduan silently assessed. The Heavenly Outer Sword Sect was currently one of the 5 great powers of the Central Plains, martial world, the strongest forces. If these 5 great powers weren't restraining each other, smaller factions would have likely fought for hegemony long ago. He knew well that among the 5 great powers, the Heavenly Outer Sword Sect was the least popular, notorious for its brutality in seizing land and women. Furthermore, there were rumors that their rapid expansion was linked to a secret treasure. Simply because he claimed to be from the Heavenly Outer Sword Sect and was wearing expensive clothes, the guard let him in without checking his identity. Bai Liduan walked through the gate, noting that the security here was truly too lax. He told himself that if he were an assassin sent to kill the branch leader, that person would likely be dead already. Led inside, Bai Liduan, still in the role of the silver-haired Ma Yingchang, was greeted by the branch leader with extreme warmth and respect. In contrast to the leader's enthusiastic attitude, Bai Liduan remained aloof. The leader frantically asked for the visiting nobleman's name. Bai Liduan calmly replied, it is Ma Yingchang. The current sect leader of the Heavenly Outer Sword Sect was his uncle. Immediately, the branch leader saluted respectfully and expressed his honor. Bai Liduan secretly smiled, assessing that although Ma Yingchang did exist, he was a recluse, so the outside world knew very little about him. After inviting Bai Liduan to sit and pouring tea, the branch leader listened to the purpose of the visit. Bai Liduan began. The reason I came here is because I have an important matter to discuss with you. He continued by explaining that the Heavenly Outer Sword Sect clan was searching for someone. Bai Liduan got straight to the point. While hunting him down, we discovered that he had once held a hostage at this place, and I heard you were the one who intervened at that time. The branch leader immediately worriedly asked about the crime of the pursued individual, but Bai Liduan refused to disclose it, saying it was a clan internal matter. He only emphasized, however, this is an important matter that even the elders in our clan are paying attention to. That's why I rushed here without prior notice. And with this intervention, catching that person is only a matter of time. Bai Liduan maintained his serious demeanor and continued, and I want to catch him before anyone else in the clan. I want to prove that my abilities are superior to the other heirs in the clan. The man continued to listen with his head bowed without giving any further opinion. Bai Liduan made an enticing offer. Furthermore, don't you also want to be promoted to the headquarters of the Murim Alliance? Bai Liduan's words made the branch leader sweat, looking surprised and tense. Bai Liduan continued to hint, knowing many branch leaders dreamed of moving up to the headquarters. He whispered into Leader Gong's ear, if you can help me find the whereabouts of Guo Dushu, I will have you promoted to the headquarters. This single statement caused a stir in the leader's heart. Bai Liduan knew many branch leaders dreamed of moving up to the Murim Alliance headquarters, and having the Heavenly Outer Sword Sect as a backer would be a huge springboard. He asked blankly, are you serious? Bai Liduan, still composed and serious, continued to argue that he also needed a trustworthy person inside the Murim Alliance headquarters. However, he paused meaningfully, adding that this promise would come with a condition. You must find him as quickly as possible, because there isn't much time left for you to seize this opportunity. Forced into action, the branch leader remained silent for a moment. Then, he quickly composed himself and bowed in reply. I think I can help you, great warrior. You just need to wait a moment. Bai Liduan was satisfied with this reaction, stood up and said, I will wait for good news from you, making a show of preparing to leave. The branch leader hastily stopped him and took out a scroll with a portrait of the pursued criminal. Bai Liduan asked for confirmation. Is this Guodushu? The branch leader smugly replied, yes, I am also hunting down this vicious criminal, and I have found his location. Bai Liduan, maintaining a cold and serious expression, immediately asked, where is he? The branch leader answered, Jinan, sir. He provided more information. That scoundrel is obsessed with gambling. He's willing to sell his own child for money. You can find him in the gambling dens in Jinan. Having achieved his goal, Bai Liduan stood and reaffirmed his promise to help him advance further. As if he had struck gold, branch leader Gong was immensely excited. He cupped his hands and bowed, expressing absolute loyalty. I will serve you with all my heart. Before leaving, Bai Liduan did not forget to request absolute secrecy about this matter. Branch leader Gong smiled brightly and immediately promised. Of course, after establishing the agreement, Bai Liduan moved on to the step of retrieving the money. He inquired about the bounty for catching the man. Branch leader Gong smiled and replied, it's 5,000 taels. Bai Liduan intentionally inflated the amount to 20,000 taels to pressure him. Branch leader Gong was immediately astonished and tried to correct him. It's 5,000 taels, not 20,000. Bai Liduan stared intently at leader Gong with icy eyes. Under the pressure of this noble figure, the leader was compelled to agree to the 20,000 taels. Bai Liduan gave an instruction. After 3 days, bring the money to Jinan. Branch leader Gong could only bow in obedience. Yes, sir. 3 days later, at a secluded location on the outskirts of Jinan, the leader of the Gong branch trembled as he brought the large, agreed-upon sum of money to the meeting point. Bai Liduan, with his usual cold expression and confident eyes, was already waiting. The moment he arrived, leader Gong was momentarily terrified. The severed head of Guodushu was neatly placed on a nearby rock. Bai Liduan merely glanced at his reaction, then calmly asked, what's with the reaction? Isn't that the inevitable outcome? Leader Gong immediately shifted his attitude, forcing a fake, submissive smile. But Bai Liduan didn't pay any mind. He got straight to the point. Where's the money? Not daring to delay, leader Gong hurriedly took out a large cloth bag containing the full 20,000 taels they had agreed upon. He looked at the gruesome severed head and offered a flattering smile, congratulating Bai Liduan on soon inheriting the family. Bai Liduan took the money bag, not even bothering to open it and count. Seeing this, leader Gong quickly reassured him, guaranteeing that he had checked it thoroughly. Bai Liduan smiled meaningfully, complimented leader Gong on his carefulness, and then suggested he immediately go to the headquarters. Hearing about the prospect of going to the headquarters, leader Gong was extremely eager and excited. However, Bai Liduan's next sentence froze the smile on his face. Bai Liduan said coldly, he confessed that he and you colluded to steal money from the Bai swordsman family. Leader Gong was completely shocked and panicked, stammering to deny the crime. He never expected that bastard to confess before his death. Bai Liduan reassured him in a terrifying tone, I like people who are materialistic. Only such people will do daring things. Leader Gong was drenched in cold sweat, bowing his head to express thanks for the understanding. However, Bai Liduan maintained a suspicious look and turned to ask, nevertheless, I'm still curious. Why did you do it? Leader Gong was flustered, his mind racing to find an explanation. He secretly cursed the one who had been beheaded for confessing his name. Leader Gong sadly thought that if he lied now, he would permanently lose Bai Liduan's trust. Then he found a plausible explanation, saying that the other Billy Duan was scum. But that very answer made Billy Duan burst into louder laughter. Leader Gong bowed his head, trying to force an ingratiating smile despite not quite understanding. But Bai Liduan's next action made him unable to maintain the pretense any longer. Bai Liduan reached up and tore off the carefully placed mask on his face, revealing a familiar face. Leader Gong was stunned. His entire body trembled, sweat poured out. He never expected the person standing before him to be the descendant of the Bai family. Bai Liduan hoisted the money bag onto his shoulder and smiled coldly. I thought I had committed a great sin. Leader Gong questioned him in shock, but Bai Liduan coldly cut him off. If you wanted to discipline me, violence would have been enough. Why did you also take the Bai family's money? Those words were like a dagger stabbing straight into the truth. Old Gong couldn't justify himself anymore. All he could think about was the money bag he was tricked out of. He screamed, demanding the money bag back, wanting to reclaim it, but Bai Liduan wouldn't let him, smiling. Since when was this money yours? He stole it from my family. Exposed, Gong's face contorted with fear and anger. He roared, shut up. Then he drew his twin swords and charged straight ahead. The moment Leader Gong drew his sword and charged, a dazzling light flared up. The duel took place and ended in a flash. Bai Liduan handled it cleanly. His speed and swordsmanship were completely dominant. Leader Gong collapsed onto the rock, blood flowing from his wound, groaning in pain. Bai Liduan stood tall, sword in hand, looking down at the scoundrel below, as if saying, The Martial Arts Alliance leader did not appoint you as a leader to do such trashy things. Leader Gong had failed his mission, and that was the price he had to pay. Bai Liduan said no more and left, abandoning the dying leader Gong next to Guo Dushu's severed head. After completing the recovery of the stolen money, Bai Liduan departed, returning to the black market in Jinan for his transaction. The old vendor was quite surprised, staring at the money bag placed on the table. He smiled contentedly, saying that he thought he would succeed and that he had indeed proven it. Bai Liduan smiled faintly and said, "I also didn't expect to be able to retrieve it in time." The vendor picked up the money bag, went inside, and asked Bai Liduan to wait there. The elixir would be delivered after he checked the money. Bai Liduan looked at the money bag he had just retrieved, which contained 44,000 taels. With that amount, an ordinary person could live comfortably for life, and their children could even rely on it. But only those in the martial arts world would understand that they were willing to spend such a vast sum to increase their internal energy by 15 years. That also meant the money bought 15 years of training time and effort for a person. After confirming the amount, the vendor brought out an exquisitely decorated box and handed it to Bai Liduan. Bai Liduan opened the box. His eyes showed surprise as he inspected the item. Inside, a rare ginseng root was carefully placed in a layer of preservation material. This 1,000-year herb was in excellent condition. Seeing Bai Liduan's expression, the elder praised Bai Liduan's rare fortune. Bai Liduan knew it too, closed the box, and bowed formally to express his thanks. The vendor rubbed his chin, satisfied. Having achieved his goal, Bai Liduan put on his hat and left. The old man watched his retreating figure and chuckled. As expected, the elixir does pick its owner. Bai Liduan found a secluded cave, deep in the mountains, where he could go into seclusion and safely absorb the medicinal power. He sat down and took off his outer robe. He took out the 1,000-year ginseng to begin cultivating. For ordinary people, it was a treasure for longevity, and for those in the martial arts world, it was equivalent to 10, 15 years of internal energy. Bai Liduan gripped the 1,000-year ginseng tightly. He clearly understood his advantage. Normally, average masters could only absorb 10 years of internal energy from the 1,000-year ginseng, but with his internal cultivation method, he would be able to absorb 15 years of power. Bai Liduan brought the precious root to his mouth and consumed it. The medicinal power exploded like rolling fire within his body. Bai Liduan immediately entered a meditative state, circulating his cultivation method to regulate the immense flow of internal energy surging into his meridians. Heat emanated from his body, turning his skin reddish, and his sweat evaporated, forming a thin mist. Bai Liduan focused all his concentration on the absorption process. Every muscle fiber tensed, and a blue light enveloped his body. The vitality from the 1,000-year ginseng was completely assimilated. From the stone cliff face, a dazzling light shone out, illuminating the entire area. That was the clear sign of a master who had just completed a breakthrough in cultivation, releasing a powerful surge of internal energy. Bai Liduan had returned, stronger than ever, ready to face new challenges in the martial arts world. After fully absorbing the essence of the 1,000-year ginseng, Bai Liduan felt a formidable surge of internal energy coursing through his veins. He stood up, his gaze sharp, cold, and brimming with confidence. With the addition of 15 years of cultivation, Bai Liduan now possessed a total of 20 years of internal power. Bai Liduan began to test his newfound strength, drawing his sword to execute a sequence of sword arts. The blade swung out, thrusting straight forward with precision. With every step and every strike, he felt his internal energy surging forth like a torrent. Moreover, every movement had become naturally more fluid and graceful. His ability to execute martial arts techniques had skyrocketed. As Bai Liduan performed the sword moves, powerful energy swirled around the blade. This was the undeniable result of gaining an additional 15 years of cultivation. He began to test his Qinggong, lightness skill, crouching low to gather momentum before leaping upwards. His figure vanished in the blink of an eye. His entire body ascended effortlessly into the air. He landed directly and lightly upon the very tip of a tree branch. Standing high above, the majestic mountain scenery unfolded before his eyes, signaling the start of a new journey. This sense of exhilaration gave Bai Liduan hope that the path ahead would not be as blood-soaked as his past life. A fierce hope for a new future began to kindle within him. Bai Liduan's silhouette gently faded from the high treetop. Having completed his secluded cultivation, Bai Liduan returned home. As soon as he stepped through the door, Guangtu anxiously scolded him for being late, fearing that something untoward had happened. He breathed a sigh of relief seeing the young master return safely. He had been genuinely worried after losing contact for several days. Bai Liduan looked at Guangtu's puffy eyes, silently grateful for the sleepless worry the boy had endured for his sake. He stepped in continually, gently reassuring him, "Hey kid, you don't need to worry about me." But Guangtu retorted indignantly, asking how he could possibly be at ease. Still anxious, he followed close behind, pressing for details on what had happened. In contrast to the boy's agitation, Bai Liduan remained calm, replying with a single meaningful sentence, "I always settle my debts." Guang Tu was startled. That answer implied that everything had already been resolved. Then Bai Liduan turned to check on his progress, asking if Guang Tu had finished learning the sword set he had assigned. Guang Tu was taken aback by the sudden question and asked, "Right now?" Under the young master's urging, Guang Tu tried to evade, as his worry for Bai Liduan had prevented him from truly focusing on his training. Immediately, Bai Liduan insisted that he demonstrate it at once. Under that pressure, Guang Tu seriously channeled his internal energy. His whole body began to relax, and a gentle aura emanated around him. It was the sign of utilizing internal cultivation. Bai Liduan stood behind him, placing a hand on Guang Tu's back to sense the internal qi emitting from the boy. A look of satisfaction crossed Bai Liduan's face. Although Guang Tu claimed he hadn't learned it, he had actually practiced very diligently. The test was sufficient, and Bai Liduan did not spare his praise, making Guang Tu genuinely happy. Guang Tu was moved to tears. His efforts had finally been recognized by the young master. Bai Liduan had not expected Guang Tu to be so overjoyed. Guang Tu admitted that this was the first compliment he had received since he started learning martial arts, which was why he was so delighted. Bai Liduan reassured him not to pay too much attention to such small details. However, this trait of Guang Tu reminded him of his trusted confidant, Baekyo. He too had been a sentimental man, a martial general like him, yet he would find joy simply in watching the first snow of the season. It seemed that in both the past and the present, those closest to Bai Liduan possessed such sentimental sides. Through small observations, Guang Tu realized that young master Bai Liduan had changed. Bai Liduan thought to himself that the boy was very sharp. Perhaps being by his side for so long made it easy for him to notice changes in his aura. Amused, Bai Liduan turned back to ask what exactly Guang Tu had noticed. Contrary to Bai Liduan's deep thoughts, Guang Tu was quite simple-minded. He said he felt the young master seemed calmer. Bai Liduan smiled, realizing he had overthought things. But Guang Tu's imagination ran wild, speculating whether the young master had found a sweetheart. This question left Bai Liduan feeling even more helpless. But Guang Tu didn't stop. He grew more enthusiastic, acting as if he had grasped the truth, rambling on until Bai Liduan was left speechless. Bai Liduan shook his head, smiled faintly, and tried to cut off Guang Tu's train of thought to resume sword training, asking him to bring out a sword. Guang Tu was startled by how quickly the atmosphere shifted. Their training session officially began now. Bai Liduan stood by, carefully observing every sword stroke, meticulously correcting every movement for Guang Tu. Under Bai Liduan's guidance, Guang Tu focused all his effort on sword practice, beginning the process of learning new techniques. After Bai Liduan gave a brief instruction on the sword arts, Guang Tu continued to practice. Bai Liduan smiled with satisfaction at Guang Tu's serious attitude and diligent effort. Leaving Guang Tu to practice outside, Bai Liduan retreated inside to meditate and regulate his breathing after absorbing the medicinal efficacy. While Bai Liduan was deep in meditation with his eyes closed, suddenly, Guang Tu burst in, his face filled with panic, announcing that something huge had happened, interrupting the cultivation session. With a voice full of terror, Guang Tu delivered the shocking news. The Martial Arts Alliance leader has passed away. Yet, upon hearing such earth-shattering news, Bai Liduan merely breathed a sigh of relief. This reaction baffled Guang Tu. Guang Tu hurriedly continued, gesticulating wildly. The entire Jianghu is in chaos. Everyone is talking about this event, but Bai Liduan remained utterly indifferent. Seeing the young master's calm, almost cold attitude, Guang Tu felt incredibly confused. In response, Bai Liduan chuckled softly and asked, "Should I cry?" Saying so, he stretched lazily, appearing completely unconcerned by the news he had just received. Guang Tu was left speechless. Bai Liduan gently gazed out the window. Bai Liduan had once been astonished. He never thought he would die in such a way. The atmosphere in the room grew heavier, and Guang Tu asked curiously, "I wonder what kind of person the alliance leader was." Bai Liduan simply smiled and replied, "Who knows?" Guang Tu replied with a sad expression, "The alliance leader must have been very disappointed." That remark made Bai Liduan curious, so he asked for the reason. Guang Tu frankly spoke his mind. He believed that for someone in the happiest position in the world to die was incredibly unfair, and if it were him, he would feel a great sense of injustice. Hearing the word happiness, Bai Liduan's eyes wavered slightly as he thought to himself, "Was I truly happy?" Images of his past life flashed in Bai Liduan's mind. Everyone feared the alliance leader and viewed him as an untouchable existence. Even with two close retainers by his side, he could not help but feel lonely in his heart. Gradually, the distance between them had grown wider. Although his subordinates were fiercely loyal, ready to sacrifice their lives to execute orders, there was always an invisible wall separating them. As the alliance leader, Bai Liduan had never even had a deep conversation with advisor Gal Saryang. No one had ever dared to speak the truth to his face. It turned out that the majestic martial arts alliance leader was, in reality, the loneliest person of all. Not letting the young master dwell in the past for too long, Guangtu approached and invited him for a few drinks. Guangtu explained that he wanted to offer condolences to the alliance leader as one would for an elder. That answer made Bai Liduan pause in surprise. Then he happily agreed. Perhaps heaven had helped him, giving him a chance to live another life. He would live happily and stay true to his own emotions. In contrast to the cheerful atmosphere at the Bai residence, the air in the alliance leader's great hall was tense. Advisor Gal Saryang was still in a state of shock. He still could not believe that their invincible alliance leader was dead. Contrary to Gal Saryang's grief, the leader of the Moonlight Group, Zuo Tilong, was impatient to find a successor, arguing that they could delay no longer. The factions began to vie for power. Gal Saryang never expected that a man, who had once sworn loyalty with his life, would propose a successor without consulting him first. A man with such illustrious achievements in the past had changed dizzyingly fast after the alliance leader's death. Not just him, but the entire council of elders as well. It seemed they had prepared for this for a long time. Gal Saryang clenched his fists in anger. All these actions only reinforced Gal Saryang's suspicion. The alliance leader had definitely been assassinated. Ignoring the mournful atmosphere, Zuo Tilong calmly argued that they should prioritize the greater good, but Gal Saryang merely replied indifferently that he would think about it. Gal Saryang's answer caused Zuo Tilong's face to turn cold, and he slammed his teacup down on the table. He stood up, adopting a coercive attitude, stating that if there were further delays, they would proceed without advisor Gal Saryang's consensus. After he left, Gal Saryang let out a soft sigh, disappointment clearly visible on his face. The factions had colluded with one another. Even as the advisor, Gal Saryang would find it difficult to alter this situation. His gaze drifted into the distance, remembering alliance leader Tian Hejin, a man who should not have departed in such a manner. Leaving the estate, Bai Liduan immersed himself in the bustling atmosphere of the city. He chose a quiet corner in a tavern, leisurely pouring a cup of tea. His eyes vacantly watched the crowd, but his ears sharply picked up every movement around him. As expected, the death of the martial arts alliance leader remained the hottest topic. At the next table, a group of martial artists was gathered around an old man with a serious expression, who was holding forth on the final battle between alliance leader Tian Hejin and the terrifying war demon. He lowered his voice mysteriously, claiming that most stories circulating in the Jianghu were nonsense, then slapped his chest and declared, "Because I was there." Hearing this, Bai Liduan couldn't help but smirk. It was amusing to sit here, listening to people weave tales about his own death while he was living a new life right before their eyes. In his mind, the visceral and brutal memory of that night resurfaced. Torrential rain washing away the stench of blood, surrounded by piles of corpses. No one had left that battle alive. Although he knew the old man was blatantly lying to gain some fleeting fame, Bai Liduan did not expose him. The story became increasingly embellished. The war demon was described as a gigantic monster standing 2.7 meters tall, with fists as large as a grown man's head, a creature born only for slaughter. But contrary to the rumors, when Bai Liduan first met him, he looked like a frail scholar, small in stature, barely 1.5 meters tall, with a slender frame ill-suited for the brutal battlefield. Bai Liduan smirked slightly and set his teacup down. Although the old man's words exaggerated the appearance, one thing could not be denied. The terror of the war demon was real. He was a madman with overwhelming power, a true monster that forced alliance leader Tian Hejin to use every ounce of his strength to counter. But then the story veered into ridiculous deification. The old man enthusiastically described the alliance leader soaring into the sky, dodging the war demon's force, then transforming into a mighty azure dragon, raining down sword chi that engulfed everything. The listeners gasped in admiration, calling it a divine technique, revering the deceased as the sword god, and some even lamented that they could die happy if they had witnessed such a scene. Bai Liduan quietly raised his teacup to his lips, hiding a smile of helplessness. In his memory, that life and death battle had no dragons or phoenixes, only a pathetic struggle in the mud, barely managing to plunge his sword into the enemy's heart. But what made Bai Liduan's blood boil was not the excessive deification, but the group's next topic. One guy in the group lowered his voice, looking skeptical. "Haven't you heard the rumor that Tian Hejin amassed a massive fortune through illicit means?" Bai Liduan, in the middle of sipping his tea, nearly choked. His eyes widened to their limit, his expression shifting from indifference to utter shock. What? I made money illicitly. The crowd chimed in, analyzing with the logic of commoners. With such high martial arts and sitting as alliance leader for so long, surely he must have embezzled? There must be tens of millions, no, hundreds of millions of silver taels. The rumors grew more distorted, leaving Bai Liduan stunned into silence. He could tolerate people spinning nonsense, but the title of corrupt official was an insult he could not swallow. A dignified alliance leader who lived a life of purity was now turned into a corrupt official hoarding wealth by the tongues of the world. Bai Liduan stood up to leave, the injustice choking him, forcing him to bitterly swallow his anger. It turned out that the price of becoming a legend after death was to let the world fabricate his character without any way to rise from the grave to clear his name. Leaving the noisy and scandalous tea house, Bai Liduan pulled his hat low, walking through the bustling crowd yet feeling utterly lost. The malicious rumors about his greed weighed heavily on his heart. Bai Liduan sighed, his eyes sorrowful. It turns out, they never understood how much I loved this world. Returning to the training ground, his sadness was quickly replaced by satisfaction. Before him, Guangtu was drenched in sweat, passionately practicing every sword stroke. Bai Liduan stood silently watching, a faint smile returning to his lips. He thought to himself that this foolish kid would probably never know how lucky he was. In the vast martial world, countless people yearned for but could never get the chance to be personally instructed by the former alliance leader, let alone easily be taught the ultimate art, 7 forms of the Southern Sea. Seeing Guangtu so focused, Bai Liduan spoke up to interrupt, praising his progress. Taking this opportunity, he imparted a core philosophy. Remember this, even with the same martial art, the power will differ completely depending on the user. The most important thing in martial arts is, and always will be, the person. Guangtu nodded, engraving this into his heart. At this moment, Bai Liduan presented the item he had bought during his stroll, a brand new sword, far sharper than the dull one the boy was using. Guangtu took the sword, his eyes wide with amazement. Bai Liduan's silent care and kindness made the small servant too moved to speak. Urged by Bai Liduan, Guangtu timidly drew the sword from its sheath. Bai Liduan smiled, looking at Guangtu with gentle eyes. The teenager was dazed, exclaiming that this sword felt completely different, and he was convinced it was because it held the young master's affection. Bai Liduan laughed, gently correcting him. It's simply because you've never held a true treasure sword before. But after hearing this, Guangtu wore a sad expression that made the smile on Bai Liduan's lips freeze. Guangtu always had chilling thoughts in his head that Bai Liduan could never understand. He said, "Ancients often say, people only suddenly change their nature and do unusually good things when they are about to die." Responding to Guangtu's deduction, Bai Liduan teased, "Am I really about to die? If that's truly the case, I must write a will so that the two of us are buried together." That weird and somewhat dark thought made Guangtu shudder. Bai Liduan stood silently, looking pensively at Guangtu, but his mind drifted back to the glorious yet lonely past of his previous life. Back then, as the alliance leader, he stood at the pinnacle of the martial world, with thousands bowing in submission at his feet. He once considered that fear and absolute respect as the measure of success, his pride, and proof of his invincible power. But reflecting on it now, he realized how lonely that peak was, when not a single person dared to look him in the eye to converse. But now, seeing Guangtu comfortably swinging his sword in front of him, Bai Liduan felt regret for his distant lifestyle of the past. Guangtu's determined declaration, "I will definitely become a master with the sword you bestowed," dispelled his heavy thoughts. Bai Liduan smiled with quiet satisfaction. It turned out that happiness did not lie in supreme authority, but right here in this sincere and simple connection. Leaving the training ground, Bai Liduan accidentally bumped into Song Hualin's father. He had just visited Bai Liduan's father and appeared quite awkward. Since the engagement was annulled, the deep relationship between the two families had become incredibly strained. As an elder, he kindly comforted Bai Liduan, suggesting that the lost years of youth were also a necessary experience for later maturity. Responding to that concern, Bai Liduan behaved with great dignity. Bai Liduan secretly admired the strong friendship between him and his own father. In his past life, despite standing above thousands, he never had such soulmates who could comfortably look each other in the eye and talk like that. He also tried to smooth the atmosphere by making excuses for his daughter's decision to break the engagement, treating it as just the fickleness of youth. Bai Liduan did not hold a grudge. On the contrary, he calmly asserted, marriage should be decided by the people involved. This maturity left the elder stunned. After saying that, Bai Liduan also felt the atmosphere become a bit awkward. Elder Song turned to leave, but he was determined not to give up on this marriage. Waiting for Elder Song to fully depart, Guangtu was already waiting outside the door. He tiptoed in, His face beaded with sweat and his expression twisted with impatience. Liduan breathed a sigh of relief after that awkward meeting. Guangtu didn't understand why Liduan was so stubborn and rejected this good match. For his part, Liduan didn't understand why Guangtu was so obsessed with this marriage. He nonchalantly listed a series of Song Hualin's virtues. She was beautiful, had a prestigious family background, and was exceptionally intelligent and talented. Wasn't that the person everyone wanted to marry? Liduan's voice dropped as he said, "But the most important thing is missing, and that is love." This answer silenced Guangtu, and indeed, the two of them did not love each other. Guangtu still listened blankly to the young master's explanation, but that look made Liduan feel confused. His expression became awkward as he asked Guangtu why he was making such a face. After Liduan's charismatic answer, Guangtu stopped joking and looked at him with eyes full of admiration. He sincerely admitted, "Young master, you really have grown up." Liduan could only smile in response to the comment. The short conversation ended when Guangtu announced that the family head was summoning him. Liduan immediately went to see his father. There, his father confirmed that Elder Song had just visited and had adamantly declared that the engagement could not be annulled. Liduan was aware of this and informed his father that he had also met Elder Song before coming here. Both of them felt a bit helpless due to the man's stubbornness. However, the major matter his father wanted to discuss did not stop at ordinary romance. He solemnly announced shocking news. The Shandong Merchant Guild, the largest trading force in the region, had ambitions to gather the clans to form the so-called Shandong Alliance. The news of the Shandong Alliance shook Liduan. His father said that not only in Shandong, but everywhere, groups were stirring to form alliances before a new martial arts alliance leader was elected. Deep down, Liduan felt a deep concern. In his past life, he had strictly forbidden the martial world and merchant guilds from forming cliques to prevent the seeds of chaos. But his father added, "Most suspicious of all is that the Shandong Merchant Guild wants to back Song Hualin's father to become the head of the alliance." Liduan probed his father's intention. He affirmed firmly that he would support every decision of his close friend. Liduan understood the nature of merchants too well. They only acted when they saw huge profits, especially when partnering with martial forces. He decided he must investigate the motive behind this move by the Merchant Guild. Liduan smiled and thanked his father for sharing this information. His father agreed, believing these were matters Liduan needed to know, and dismissed him. Liduan smiled and asked for permission to leave. Liduan felt his relationship with his parents was becoming deeper. At first he thought he had to force himself to view them as his parents, but gradually, his heart had turned towards them, feeling that they were truly his parents. Liduan felt that if he was truly filial to them, his late mother would also be happy about it. Just as his thoughts ended, Liduan unexpectedly bumped into the person he had just mentioned in the engagement story, Song Hualin. Liduan hadn't expected Miss Song to come as well. Casting aside initial awkwardness, Song Hualin frankly admitted she sought Liduan because she had a favor to ask. Hearing that, Liduan was quite surprised. What matter required her to seek him out? Her request was crystal clear. She hoped Liduan would persuade his father to influence her father to reject the partnership offer from the Shandong Merchant Guild. Liduan did not rush to answer, but he wondered if his father could change the decision even if he intervened. Song Hualin wasn't entirely sure, but the opinion of clan leader Bai would certainly have a significant impact on her father's decision. Liduan sighed, saying he understood why she said that, but he still wondered why she wanted to stop it. Song Hualin frankly admitted that leading the Shandong Alliance was not suitable for her father, but Liduan asked in return if she was underestimating him too much. Song Hualin stood her ground, believing it would be 100 times better than the disasters that would follow. Liduan smiled in approval. He realized the girl before him was not only intelligent but also had an incredibly sharp view of the times, understanding the danger of delusions of grandeur amidst the approaching chaos. Liduan didn't agree immediately, but noted that leading an alliance in peacetime could help increase the Song family's power. That was exactly what made Song Hualin truly worried. Liduan asked for the meaning behind her words. Song Hualin continued to reveal her deep concerns, things few dared to voice. She believed that the peace of the martial world recently was merely superficial, maintained by the overwhelming power of the former alliance leader. But deep down, there were still hidden dangers lurking in the shadows. Having stood at the top for so many years, Liduan asked directly about her thoughts. Song Hualin coldly replied, "It is suppressed desire." Hearing this answer from Song Hualin also stunned Liduan. She analyzed that people in the Jianghu were naturally competitive, carrying violent blood and a desire to trample others to climb higher. "We are wolves and tigers, not rabbits or deer, correct?" Song Hualin's fierce assertion and penetrating insight into human nature left Liduan completely speechless. It was that absolute rule that had forced the heroes to hide their true nature, locking themselves in invisible cages for fear of being purged. After waiting so long for the current alliance leader's death, now that the chains were broken, the disaster was only just beginning. Song Hualin's words were like a bolt of lightning. Bai Liduan stared at her in shock. From the perspective of the former martial arts alliance leader, he hadn't expected it. Did they want him dead? Ending the conversation, Bai Liduan returned to his room. He changed his clothes to prepare to go out, but Song Hualin's words still echoed in his ears. Those words awakened a memory he had inadvertently forgotten. In a daze, Bai Liduan saw the scene of a meeting at the alliance leader's manor years ago. He saw the eyes of those who once submitted at his feet, those he thought were loyal or fearful of his authority. But now, from the perspective of an outsider suggested by Song Hualin, he realized the terrifying truth hidden behind those eyes. It turned out his departure was not the natural law of life and death, but quite possibly a conspiracy to break the cage of morality to satisfy ambition. Bai Liduan went to a pavilion to meet Song Hualin. When asked if he had done what she asked, Bai Liduan frankly admitted he hadn't spoken to his father. Hearing this, Song Hualin looked briefly disappointed. She apologized for bothering him. Bai Liduan quickly stopped her, asserting that it wasn't that he didn't want to help, but that her method was problematic. Song Hualin was a bit surprised. Bai Liduan thoroughly analyzed two major risks if his father were to intervene and stop Song Hualin's father. It would cause regret for her father, who would always wonder if he had missed a great opportunity. Song Hualin really hadn't thought that deeply. Bai Liduan continued with the second risk. It could cause a rift in the deep friendship between two soulmates, something neither Bai Liduan nor Song Hualin wanted. Instead of using emotion to force the issue, Bai Liduan proposed a new, smarter direction. He smiled meaningfully, asking Song Hualin if she had ever tried to find specific evidence or a pretext to persuade her father. Song Hualin was surprised by the question and admitted she hadn't. Bai Liduan smiled and gave her a piece of information. He revealed crucial intelligence he had heard. A few months ago, the Shandong Merchant Guild tried to execute a major business deal with the Song family, but then all information about it suddenly vanished. He suspected that the reason this deal was cancelled was the key to stopping the alliance. However, Song Hualin was worried because her father was about to make a decision. They didn't have enough time to investigate on their own. Bai Liduan immediately offered a solution: use information merchants. If they were willing to pay for the news, they could know the full story this very day. Hualin was surprised by this novel solution. The only concern was that it would cost some money. Bai Liduan looked at Song Hualin and concluded, "The decision is yours." Song Hualin fell silent, hesitating slightly. A few hours later, at the night market in the city, Bai Liduan and Song Hualin entered the night market to find the trading point. Song Hualin demonstrated remarkable financial capability by managing to gather a massive sum of 2,000 silver taels in just 4 hours. Seeing her anxious expression, Bai Liduan knew she had never done this before. Actually, Bai Liduan had never done it directly either, only hearing about it from advisor Gal Saryang, so her expression was normal. Finally, they stopped in front of a large building with the sign Heaven and Earth Net, Khufu Branch. Here, the eldest miss of the Song family timidly admitted that this was her first time stepping into a place for buying and selling Jianghu information. Bai Liduan smiled, but then didn't forget to remind her, "Even if you're shaking, don't show it, or we'll be price gouged." Hearing that, Song Hualin tried to pull herself together. Despite the tension, this was necessary to get the information. This display also made Bai Liduan smile with satisfaction. Both stepped into the Heaven and Earth Net, greeted by a merchant who looked quite savvy. Bai Liduan took the proactive role, stating directly that he wanted to buy information. The man looked at the two of them, assessing them slightly. Though anxious inside, Song Hualin tried to remain calm, while Bai Liduan maintained his cold, indifferent attitude from the start. After scanning them, the merchant asked about the information they wanted to buy. Bai Liduan clearly stated the request: buy information regarding the Shandong Merchant Guild's business deal. The merchant replied leisurely, his tone reeking of a profiteer. The price is 1,500 taels. Originally it was only 200, but recently market prices have skyrocketed, allowing no bargaining. Bai Liduan began to connect the dots. Surely something had happened recently to inflate the value of the news. Bai Liduan glanced back, signaling Song Hualin. She placed a large bag of money on the table in front of the merchant, affirming, "I will buy it." Receiving the money, the merchant carefully tucked it into his robe. He revealed that a few months ago, the Shandong Merchant Guild partnered with the Yang clan and advanced into Hebei. Hearing Yang clan, both Bai Liduan and Song Hualin were surprised. If it was a few months ago, that was before Bai Liduan dealt with them. The clan leader must have still been Yang Jize back then. The merchant didn't notice the guest's change in expression. He continued saying it would be very difficult to expand trade. But trusting the Yang clan's power, they pushed forward, resulting in angering the Shi family, the clan backing the Hebei Merchant Guild. A regional conflict erupted, and it could have escalated into a great war. However, the Shandong Merchant Guild subsequently weakened because the former leader of the Yang clan died. The new leader, Zheng Yu, decided to cut ties with them. When Bai Liduan asked about the moves of the Hebei Merchant Guild and the Shi family, the merchant confirmed, they are preparing for revenge, and there are even rumors they want to seize this opportunity to annex Shandong. The information ended there. Bai Liduan offered his thanks, and they both left. The information they just heard was worth more than the money they spent. Song Hualin was shocked to realize that the so-called Shandong alliance was just a hollow shell. They were merely using the Song family to escape pressure from the Hebei Merchant Guild and the Shi family. With the information they now had, it wasn't hard to see that. Song Hualin shuddered at the sinister plots of the factions. Bai Liduan admitted the current situation was truly terrifying. She decided she must immediately return to inform her father. Before leaving, Hualin paused to thank Bai Liduan. Bai Liduan coldly replied that no thanks were needed, as she bought the information with her own money. This blunt but gentlemanly statement surprised Hualin and stirred her heart slightly. The two parted ways. Back at the Bai estate, Guangtu asked Bai Liduan about the visit from the Song father and daughter yesterday. Bai Liduan confirmed it. The Song family head, after hearing the story, personally came to see Bai Liduan to express his gratitude. When the Song family head thanked him for helping find the truth, Bai Liduan humbly denied the credit. He said that Song Hualin was the one who found it, and he merely escorted her. This well-intentioned lie greatly surprised Song Hualin standing nearby, as she knew well who was the key figure. The Song family head seemed to understand the meaning behind those words, but he did not expose it. He stepped forward, using his large hands to grasp Bai Liduan's hand, trembling with emotion. Without you, our family would have fallen into a great disaster. Bai Liduan paused for a beat. These large, rough hands are strangely warm. He was genuinely grateful to this young man. Back to the present, Guangtu slyly teased Bai Liduan that he must have scored points with the eldest miss and been invited for a drink. However, Bai Liduan extinguished all romantic fantasies with a concise answer. They left immediately after. Guangtu still regretted that Bai Liduan didn't capitalize on the Song miss's affection. Bai Liduan smiled faintly, affirming he didn't help her expecting such things. Bai Liduan suddenly changed the topic, challenging the other to a spar immediately, making Guangtu jump. Guangtu was dumbfounded, wondering why he wanted to fight all of a sudden. If the young master was in a bad mood, he should go find Miss Song to vent. Bai Liduan ordered Guangtu to stop the nonsense and draw his sword. Guangtu was shocked by the request to use real swords. Bai Liduan smiled, suggesting that it was obvious for a sparring session. Seeing Bai Liduan wasn't joking, Guangtu asked fearfully, "Shouldn't we use wooden swords?" Bai Liduan looked at him, his eyes deep and cold like a winter lake. He said, "That would be fine, if you plan to never draw your sword outside that wall." The softly spoken words carried the weight of 1,000 pounds, leaving Guangtu stunned, his words choking in his throat. But a second later, determination flashed across his face as he turned to retrieve his sword. Stepping into the center of the vast training ground, he gripped the sword tightly in his hand. Those hands were still trembling violently, out of fear. Entering the battle, Bai Liduan's face became more serious than ever, regardless of who the opponent was. Guangtu was truly terrified to hold a sword and step into combat. Bai Liduan did not mock him. Instead, he affirmed that such fear was correct. Pointing a weapon at another is inherently a terrifying act. However, Bai Liduan emphasized, one must not give up or surrender because of that fear. This made Guangtu startle slightly. Bai Liduan thought to himself that every word he spoke contained profound martial understanding. In truth, Guangtu didn't think that deeply. He was simply afraid of hurting the young master. This explanation made Bai Liduan chuckle with relief. Bai Liduan reassured him, ordering Guangtu to stop worrying and attack as if he were a real enemy. Guangtu shouted yes, regaining his spirit. He raised his sword high above his head. Satisfied with this attitude, Bai Liduan seriously readied his sword. Casting aside hesitation, Guangtu stomped his foot firmly on the ground. He swung a powerful sword stroke, lunging forward. Guangtu's ferocious downward slash was blocked effortlessly by Bai Liduan with just one hand. Guangtu gritted his teeth, straining to withstand the terrifying counterforce. Seeing Guangtu blindly using brute force with eyes closed, Bai Liduan shouted a correction. "Open your eyes and do it properly." The powerful shout jolted Guangtu awake. He stepped back to gather momentum. Then he charged frantically, slashing continuously. Bai Liduan remained composed, parrying every blow. This time Guangtu was more serious, launching attack after attack. Blow after blow, one struck and the other blocked. Sword strokes tore through the wind, carrying intense determination. However, the gap in skill was immense. Bai Liduan moved fluidly like flowing water and drifting clouds, effortlessly neutralizing every move. His gaze sharp, he twisted his wrist slightly. His blade instantly knocked Guangtu's weapon aside, causing the boy to stumble. As the blade grazed past his face, Guangtu squeezed his eyes shut in instinctive fear, his face grimacing. Bai Liduan roared in anger. "Open your eyes. Close them, and you are dead. Focus on your stance." The warning struck straight into his chaotic mind. Guangtu shouted, "Yes," to dispel his fear. Then he swung the sword down with all his might. But his sword technique was too simple, while his opponent was an insurmountable mountain. He gritted his teeth, closing his eyes to withstand the deflections. Seeing him distracted and exposing an opening, Bai Liduan glided forward, emitting a killing intent so intense it made the boy's hair stand on end. In that moment, the person standing before him was no longer the young master, but the embodiment of the Reaper himself. Guangtu froze, squeezing his eyes shut in terror. Breath caught in his chest, cold sweat pouring down. Bai Liduan's cold sword tip halted right at the bridge of his nose, a hair's breadth from his eyes. Bai Liduan's gaze remained stern. He instructed Guangtu to engrave this feeling in his memory, for this was true combat. Still dazed and recovering from the shock, Guangtu obeyed the young master. The deadly sword tip withdrew. Guangtu collapsed to the ground, trembling, gasping for air as if he had just escaped death's door. Heavy panting echoed in the silent space, sweat soaking the back of his shirt. Bai Liduan sat down beside him, looking into the distance. Bai Liduan gently offered an out. "If you are too afraid, you can stop. There is no need to force yourself." That suggestion made Guangtu pause. He lowered his head, staring at the sword in his hand. Was he afraid? Yes, scared to death. But, "I want to see it through to the end." That affirmation made Bai Liduan look over in slight surprise. A naive smile blossomed on his sweat-streaked face. He confessed that although he had been scared out of his wits just now, strangely enough, he felt happy and exhilarated to be fighting. Bai Liduan smiled with satisfaction at that answer. He agreed to continue teaching but didn't forget to tease. "That depends on your performance." The first raindrops of the season drifted down onto the stone pavement. Bai Liduan and Guangtu both looked up at the sky, feeling the breath of the arriving spring. A strange emotion stirred within Bai Liduan's heart. If the first snow had failed to move him, then the spring rain made him feel excited and curious about what the future held. A few days later, the peace was shattered. Guangtu rushed into the room in a panic, shouting loudly. "Young master!" Guangtu reported that the new martial arts alliance leader had been announced. Bai Liduan pondered, seeming to have predicted this, and coldly asked for the person's identity. However, when he heard Guangtu gasp out, "It is the sect leader of the Heavenly Blade sect," Bai Liduan could not keep his cool, his eyes wide with shock. What? Ma Fengji, leader of the Heavenly Blade sect, a man Bai Liduan knew all too well. In his eyes, Ma Fengji was trash, indulging in illicit affairs, greedy for wealth, power, hungry, insidious, and cruel. Bai Liduan could not believe that his successor was such a lowlife. Bai Liduan pressed Guangtu, asking if he had heard correctly. But the news had already spread everywhere. Bai Liduan began to piece the events together. He thought of Gal Saryang, the alliance leader's brilliant strategist. With Gal Saryang's intellect, he would never choose someone like Ma Fengji, nor was there any reason he couldn't prevent this. Bai Liduan's fist clenched tight, veins bulging. He realized there was something extremely abnormal about this situation.